thanks to everybody who is joining us today. I'm happy to have you here for our first webinar on the topic of security chaos engineering, a topic I'm very passionate about. So let's get started. So a little bit about myself. So I have spent over 10 years in cyber security, and I had a chance to actually, focus more on the cloud, on cloud security within these 10 years. I did a doctoral research at the Hasselplattner Institute, which is in Potsdam, where I reside currently. And incidentally, the investigation into how to apply, the principles of chaos engineering to cybersecurity started there. And so a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about were things I discovered there, and continue to research and apply it. I also worked in a couple of startups, mostly as cloud security engineer or cloud security researcher. I'm also a member of the AWS Community Builder, which is a community that is focused on allowing people to contribute, about AWS and a lot of things around AWS cloud. So what are we going to be talking about today? The agenda is not so much. Basically, we will start with trying to understand what chaos engineering is. This is really important because this is the basis for security chaos engineering. And then we will also look at chaos engineering, just try to define what it is, and then why do we even practice it? Why is it important? Why are we trying to kind of educate people about it? Of course, the next thing we will talk about is the differences between chaos engineering and between security chaos engineering and other existing cybersecurity practices, which is a question I normally receive from a lot of people, which is logical. Of course, it will be interesting to look at some use cases of chaos engineering, and finally, we will talk about how we as a company, Mitigant, can support you if you are really interested in diving into this really interesting field. All right, so what is chaos engineering? So to kind of lay a foundation for what chaos engineering is, since we are all really impressed with ChatGPT, which over the weekend it took over the internet, I basically went there and asked the AI what chaos engineering is. And actually, the definition it gave is quite comprehensive, which is really impressive. So it said that chaos engineering is the practice of intentionally introducing failures into a system to test its robustness and identify potential points of failure. The goal of chaos engineering is to improve the resiliency and the reliability of a system by proactively exposing and addressing potential weaknesses before they can cause significant disruptions and downtime. And quite very impressed with that. But to kind of make it easier for people to understand, I guess many years ago when Netflix started practicing these, the folks that were directly involved that built the system, they established a kind of definition which is published on the principles of chaos.org. And they basically defined chaos engineering as the discipline of experimenting on a system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. So, so let's just highlight a couple of keywords that I think are very critical for understanding chaos engineering, which is experimenting or experimentation, building confidence, and withstanding turbulent conditions. So one important part of chaos engineering is to understand that it's really about experimentation, right? It's about you trying to understand things that are not very clear to you, or things that you don't know about the system. You want to discover exactly how the system will behave in production. So it's typically a scientific method of understanding your system in a much better way, so that you can have confidence, in it. And of course, many years ago, when chaos engineering started, also there were a lot of questions around what's the difference between chaos engineering and other kinds of testing that, especially in software development, they're already being used. things like unit testing, integration testing, load testing. And eventually, today I think it's pretty clear for people in software development, SREs, DevOps, that it's different. It doesn't replace at all the existing test. Rather, it is aimed at augmenting this test. Aimed at covering the gaps that this test actually do not cover, because these kinds of tests were designed with a purpose in mind, and it turns out that this purpose was not considered. And then when Netflix started practicing chaos engineering, they discovered that, well, despite the fact that they do tests, all of these tests in development, in their development area or their development environments, it doesn't cater for the failures that they were seeing in production. So chaos engineering makes me to kind of remember how we did experiments back then in high school. As I believe some of us would have, who actually were in the sciences, would have also had experience. So we went to these labs where we will basically be told or given instructions on how to conduct a couple of tests. Maybe they are like in the science lab or in the physics lab, we have a couple of chemicals or some kind of components, and we want to mix them, and we want to kind of see what comes out of it. At the beginning of these kinds of exercises, we didn't really know what the output was going to be, and we were really excited and very curious. And oftentimes we didn't even get what we expected to get. We got something else, either because we didn't mix the right proportion of the substances or so forth. So essentially, in chaos engineering, you have an input, right? And you that input might be things like, well, you have a virtual machine, like in the days of the Chaos Monkey of Netflix, and well, you want to take out the virtual machine, and you don't know what will happen at the other end of this experiment, right? So and you want to see exactly what happens, at the end. So, and this is the difference between the ideal world and the real world, essentially. So, ideally, you go onto a system like AWS, and they tell you that, well, we promise you maybe 99.999% of availability, but it turns out that in certain instances or in certain scenarios, this level of assurance is violated, right? So, and that is what the kinds of use cases that chaos engineering tries to test and to verify. So essentially your input is a kind of hypothesis, like you claim you claim about something, and you want to see the outcome, and you inject that into the target system, and the aim is to either prove that hypothesis or not. So if you prove it, then you have confidence that, well, if you deploy that application, for example, and to the production under the same circumstances you did an experiment, you will have the desired output, right? The system will behave exactly how you designed it to behave. So building on that foundation, I think we can dive right into security chaos engineering. And again, I also went again to ChatGPT and said, hey, what do you know about security chaos engineering? And to be honest with you, I think the first time this definition it gave me, because I think the system is actually learning once you register there, once you have an account. So initially, it gave me the same definition as chaos engineering. Unfortunately, I didn't capture that definition. This afternoon, it gave me a more comprehensive definition, meaning it's actually learning, which is really impressive. But as you can see here, it clearly defines it as a subset of chaos engineering that focuses on testing and improving the security of a system, which makes me happy that it knows about security chaos engineering. But let's use the definition here that's much more concise, which was put forward by Aaron Reinhardt. So Aaron happens to be one of the guys that actually started talking about chaos security chaos engineering, and we kind of met at that time when he was talking about it. So he has a definition which I like to use because it's quite concise. So he defines it as the identification of security control failures through proactive experimentation, to build confidence in the system's ability to defend against malicious conditions in production. So let's unpack it. But I also have this very simple definition, which says it's just the application of chaos engineering principles to cybersecurity. Okay, so what are the differences between chaos engineering and security chaos engineering? This is great. It's pretty important to understand the differences. So in chaos engineering, basically the faults you're injecting, which are basically implementations of your hypothesis, they are focused on a couple of attributes, which are essentially non-security attributes. These are things like availability. So that was the essence, one of the essence of Chaos Monkey. It was basically there to enable the resilience in the context of availability of the virtual machines, right? We have performance, also part of what of Chaos Monkey was checking, reliability, and also latency. So basically, everything you can think about that is not within the confines of security. On the flip side, security chaos engineering is basically focused on security attributes, which are things like basically how whatever fault you inject, how it impacts on security, integrity, and availability. Of course, this is kind of a lot to unpack, but definitely this is how we define security. These are the cornerstones of a secure system, and we will look at a typical example in the later slides to kind of really go deeper into this description. So the next question that might come to our minds is, okay, why do we even practice security chaos engineering at this time? Why is it becoming important? Why are we talking about it? So um, we'll look at a couple of reasons. So the first one is, our modern systems are becoming really complex. They're becoming very they're not static, and as security folks, it's challenging, and it gets more challenging for us to even provide sufficient security for these complex systems. And of course, you will see that the way we test our systems today, because our systems are dynamic, the kinds of tests also have to be dynamic, right? Because the systems are changing continuously, especially when you are using cloud native infrastructure, or you're using things like infrastructure as code. So you cannot continuously use the same methods of testing that we have been using previously, right? And we will go deeper into some of these in the next slides. Here is just this slide is just like a summary of things we will discuss. So talking about complexity, these are basically star graphs that are representative of certain real systems in the world. And all of these nodes here are basically whatever system. Could be a microservice, it could be a server, it could be a web application. They are communicating among themselves, and these edges are basically lines of communication, and it just gives a perception of how complicated our systems have become. And exactly that was what Bruce Snare said a couple of years ago. I think that was already in the early 90s. He said that the future of digital systems is complexity, and complexity is the worst enemy of security. And to kind of give more to like an evidence to what he kind of say maybe prophesied, the kinds of attacks we're seeing these days are becoming more complicated, more complex, and even more successful, right? If you look at the increase of vulnerabilities, either from the National Vulnerability Database or breaches, or all of the reports that kind of gather the statistics of successful attacks, you see it's actually on the increase, because our systems, our security systems are actually struggling to be able to identify all the security vulnerabilities or the weak points, and to actually act against them, right? We have today cloud systems that really have no perimeter. So it means that all of the firewalls and all the perimeter-based security systems that we have been using in the last decade, of course, they are still effective, but their level of effectiveness has drastically reduced because of how complex our systems have become. Of course, the other thing is talking about security maturity. So this is basically the security maturity model that is put forward by Amazon Web Services, and this is basically a guide, like it is an opinion of AWS about how how you should focus your security, what things you should do depending on your level of maturity. And to the top right here, you can see here that they have mentioned in the phase 4 of the security governance that forming a chaos engineering team resilience. So this is basically beginning to exercise or beginning to adopt security chaos engineering at this stage because it becomes really important for you. So in their minds, they have seen that at a point in time, regardless of all of these other cybersecurity techniques or architectures that you might have implemented, at a point in time, you need to have some kind of security chaos engineering for you to remain secure, for you to remain resilient. So I earlier on talked about silos, right? So again, here we have a very simplified cloud native infrastructure. You have things like it's basically divided into what the Kubernetes security team called the 4 Cs of cloud native security, which are code. So basically, code means things like the basic applications that we write, Lambda functions, these are all classified under code. You have containers, you have the Kubernetes cluster, and of course you have the underlying cloud infrastructure platform under which is the platform that which all of these other abstraction layers are built upon. And so the way we build our security systems today is we build them along these lines of abstraction. For code, we have the traditional security scanners that we use and other kinds of code-centric security techniques. Of course, for containers, we have other kinds of container security tools. Kubernetes also has its own kind of security, and of course, the cloud platform. So what we observe is usually because these tools are built independently, they are in certain times they don't basically communicate amongst themselves, and this makes it super easier for attackers to kind of penetrate, because as you can see in this diagram here, you have an attacker. So from an attacker perspective, all of these are it's practically a single system, and his job there is to just find out the most important part of the infrastructure and to attack it. On the flip side, as defenders, we have abstraction layers that essentially reduce the efficiency of our security model, right? So and therefore we basically need a system that can traverse across these abstraction layers and be able to see how our defenses are from an attacker standpoint, so that we can actually adjust the defense in a way that is efficient against attacks. Okay, so now I'm going to be discussing about some of the cybersecurity approaches that are really there. So these are more like traditional security approaches. Obviously, we've been using them in the security space for a long time. They are quite efficient, and the idea here is, I mean, it's not like they are not efficient. Obviously, they remain very efficient, but how do we? What's the difference between security chaos engineering and these approaches, and what's the role of security engineering in the midst of this system? So, essentially, I'm going to be talking about red teaming, blue teaming and purple teaming, right? Okay, so first, red team. So maybe some of us are already conversant with the term penetration testing. I'm not really discussing deeply about it because essentially it's a technique that is used by all these all of these techniques. Red teams, they always use penetration and testing techniques. Basically, they're leveraging offensive security techniques. So they're attacking as attackers or as malicious criminals, and they play the role of malicious criminals to be able to identify weaknesses in a network. And so basically by doing that, they can allow you to see whether whatever defenses that you have put in place are very effective, and they are basically attacking as if you were real attackers, right? So this is basically in a very short description what red teams do. On the flip side, blue teams are the direct opposite of red teams. So they're there to defend. They're there to enable to stop whatever they feel is a malicious action. So they do this by looking at log events, combining that with threat intelligence, combining that with different kinds of attack techniques that are there on the internet or they are published. So the idea is to quickly identify anything that is an indicator of compromise, so they can stop it as early as possible. In the end, they will help to enhance all the detection and response capabilities that might have already been deployed in a system. Now, over time, people discovered that blue teams and red teams became like a competition, right? Especially when you put them in a company, it became sort of not very efficient, because the aim was for the company to have the best of both worlds together. And so the idea of purple team came up, which essentially was another team, or actually members from both teams that were selected so that they can enable collaboration between both teams, so that they can allow the company to really gain. So the blue teams are basically coordinating the activities of red and blue teams. They're collecting and exchanging information. They are also trying to ensure that whatever the red teams are kind of using are actually real world. It doesn't make sense for a company to kind of a company that is not attractive for like a nation state for the red team to be using attacks that are used by nation state actors. So those kinds of things are usually done by the blue team to make sure that these exercises are real and are within the scope of the threat model of the organization. So what are the challenges with these red, blue, and purple teaming approaches? Well, the first thing is these exercises are usually manual. So because human beings, and they have to take time to study the company, the network, and everything they do is practically manual. It's usually resource intensive. So usually, people have to plan for it. Not every company actually practices it. It's usually like companies who already have the financial capability. They have to select days or special times or special environments are created, and they spend a lot of time going through this procedure. Of course, because it's very manual, because it's very resource intensive. It's not an activity that can be done every day. Usually you will find companies practicing it every month or quarterly or even yearly. So it's super periodic activities. And as I mentioned before, usually it's not about learning, it's just about attack and defense, and people are not really learning from it, and taking home this learning so that they can actually use it in real life. The other problem is in the end, because not so many people are really vast, really have that knowledge of red teaming and purple teaming and even blue teaming. Most companies have to hire contractors, or they have to hire people from outside who will do this, and that brings in another kinds of problems, which the problem that maybe these guys have, because they're not members of the company, they don't have context of the problems of the company, they don't have deep insights, so probably they just depend on other people in the company to tell them about these threats, and they just attack based on that knowledge, which is not 100% accurate about the company, right? And again, the other problem is, after all of these exercises, the findings are, because they're from external people, the findings are not really integrated into the system. So it becomes not it's not it becomes not the very best the very best way to go about handling security. All right, so let's dive more into security chaos engineering and look at um, look at the process flow. So basically, in security chaos engineering, and just to kind of summarize the previous sections, it's more about automation. Like the huge thing about about chaos engineering and security chaos engineering is automation, right? Everything has to be automated. Human interaction has to be minimized, right? And it has to be a continuous thing right from the beginning of chaos engineering, when Netflix kind of brought out this whole idea. It was super automated. It was even part of the CI/CD pipeline. It is designed to work on its own. It is designed to reduce human intervention, and with that, it overcomes a lot of the challenges or the limitations of the other security methods I talked about. All right, so looking at how security chaos engineering is practiced, and we will basically look at more practical examples in the next slides. First, we talk about the hypothesis before. So a hypothesis is basically, it could be what a vendor told you about the system you purchased, right? It could be a firewall. They told you, well, we give you 100% assurance that no malicious traffic is going to pass through this firewall. And that, as simple as it is, could be your hypothesis, right? And one point which is not on this diagram is the part of getting um, the concept of reversibility, which means that before you even start a security chaos engineering, you need to get a steady state. And the steady state is the state of that system before you inject any failure, because at the end of the experiment, you will basically roll back the system to how it was. And this gives the confidence to do a lot of to inject failures that normally people will not want to do. All right, so you have already gotten your hypothesis, which essentially in the context of security chaos engineering is a security fault, and that is going to be injected into a target system. Could be a function, could be a web application, it could be anything that you deploy. And then the next thing is you're going to observe the impact of these security faults against a security control, a security system, whatever you've put in place to prevent any violation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So it's super important to observe and understand exactly what happens when you inject these faults, right? And this could be done through maybe things like getting the logs from those systems, or watching the logs that are or the logs that are being pumped into things like CM systems or other log analytical systems or graphs or whatever. It helps you to have eyes into the target system. Eventually, you want to exactly understand how the impact was on security, and you want to analyze it. You want to know exactly what failed, and because based on this analysis, you can definitely know how to improve, how to harden the system, so that you prevent that issue in real life. All right, so now we will look at a very simplistic example, and this example is about a ransomware attack, and it's within the context of Amazon Web Services. Of course, it doesn't mean that you cannot practice it for other cloud service providers. Um, and this example is kind of interesting because today ransomware has become one of the biggest problems, and it is super simple for cyber criminals to launch these attacks because of things like ransomware as a service, and a lot of companies are forced to pay the ransom. So Here we start with understanding or basically creating a hypothesis, getting the steady state ahead of time. The next part here, the next thing we do here is to create a user Bob. And the idea here is when you create the user Bob, you want to observe what happens, right? So ideally, if it was in AWS, probably your cloud security posture management system or things like AWS config or whatever it is will fire an alert and tell you that, well, a user has been created called Bob, and probably it will tell you who created it, from where the IP address, and that those kinds of information are really important. And so if you don't have any notification, basically it means that, well, probably you need to fix that problem, because you want to have eyes when these kinds of things are happening. It could just be a malicious user that has been created in your cloud account. So in this case here, after creating the user Bob, the next part of this attack is, the attacker basically tries to get into the EKS cluster and gets in there and then compromises a pod. And as you know, usually these pods are connected to some other services on AWS. For example, in this scenario, it's connected to S3 bucket. This is really practical, because usually this kind of compute services are either dumping resources into other services, or they are grabbing information from there to use it to process it or whatever. And for the attacker to do this, of course, there is going to be a lot of noise, right? You just see requests coming in from a pod, right? And the question here again is, you want to look at the tools that are supposed to allow you to get insights into these kinds of requests. Threat detection systems like AWS Guard Duty or Security Hub, or it could even be a third-party tool that you have deployed either in the cluster or somewhere else, that it's supposed to monitor traffic into the cluster or traffic amongst the pods and tell you that there is something happening, or it should even monitor it and tell you if these events are malicious. So, and these kinds of questions are interesting, because if you acquired or bought such expensive tool, and actually the vendors told you, well, it would take care of your cluster for you to let you know if there are malicious processes or if there are malicious traffic. And if it doesn't happen, then you have to check it out and try to understand why you don't get such alert. So to make the whole process simple, we jump to the last part. And at this part here, the attacker is able to identify, in this case, an AWS S3 bucket that has some interesting data. This might be things like financial information, or social security numbers, or whatever it thinks that is good enough that he can request a ransom, and most likely that ransom is going to be paid, right? And in this process here, the bucket is already encrypted, and what will happen here is, at this point in time, incident response will be triggered, right? These guys who are incident responders will come in, and they will try to either do some kind of damage control, or they will try to kind of allow you to remain online, regardless of the fact that maybe this sensitive S3 bucket has been encrypted. You practically have no access to it. And of course, there are a couple of controls that have to be tested here. Just a few of them that I've noted here are things like AWS S3 bucket, S3 backup. So the backups are really part of the best practices. We are told by AWS to make backups of our buckets. There are other things that are actually supposed to prevent S3 buckets from being encrypted. Things like having versioning, enabling versioning, or enabling things like S3 logging. There's a whole lot of best practices, and these kinds of this in this scenario, you have to like check whether all of these best practices have been implemented. The other part is backup. So if you had backups, well, how long does it take you to recover those backups to a usable state? You know, are they going to be corrupted during the process of recovery? Because if they get corrupted, then they're practically useless. And again, if you had incident response runbooks, for example, as some companies will have it, you also, this is a time, this kind of a scenario helps you to check how usable the runbooks are. If, for example, you had maybe security people who that would be the first day they're reading the runbook, of course they'll be confused. They will have literally no knowledge of what to do, and of course that will cause delay. So there's a whole lot of lessons to be learned, especially in this last part. And of course, at the end of this scenario, you will expect to kind of roll back all of these things and then put it back to the state where it was before, decrypt the bucket, delete the user Bob, and whatever it means, basically cleaning up your environment. All right, so I guess that was pretty fast, and of course there's going to be a Q&A session. But before I summarize or before I conclude, just to talk about what we are doing at Mitigant. So we got our continuous security verification platform. What does it mean? Well, we have three different fundamental pillars of what we do: detect, secure, and verify. Now, the verify part is kind of all what I've discussed is kind of covered under the canopy of the verify part, where we have our security chaos engineering platform, and all the things I mentioned is part of what we do automatically, so as to make it super easy for anybody who wants to practice security chaos engineering to kind of use. Apart from that, we have the typical cloud security posture management system as part of our offerings. So we are able to help you to be continuously compliant to different compliance benchmarks that are out there. We're able to allow you to fix the findings that we kind of show to you, and a whole lot of things. So definitely, if you're interested, we'll allow you to you can reach out to us. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for coming for our webinar. And this is our sign up page. Of course, if you want to see what we do, you're invited to sign up. Thank you very much. I think I will hand over to Niels now.
Thank you, Kennedy. And we can stop the recording at this point.